5 years after the acclaimed drama Waco. He is back starring in the new Showtime miniseries Waco: The Aftermath. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Oh, great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for talking to me. So, the name kind of says it all. This takes place in the aftermath of Waco and that landscape in America, the rise of extremism, domestic terrorism. Tell me about the world that your character, FBI agent Gary Noesner, is now inhabiting and who he is when we meet him in this different place in his life.
I think Gary's still kind of picking up the pieces a little bit uh, uh, after Waco. It was such a catastrophic kind of event. And it definitely wasn't all his fault or anything, but it's just a lot to process there, going through that, and definitely wanting to avoid having that happen again in the future. It's not the kind of thing you want to have happen twice, let alone once. So probably very hyper aware and wondering how Waco is going to manifest in the zeitgeist, or affect the zeitgeist consciousness of the country.
And it does. I mean, for people who weren't even born yet when Waco happened, this story tells us kind of the origins in many ways of where we are right now. When
Mm.
you were doing the research for this, how much of the story did you already know? I mean, also going back 5 years when you did the original story, but how much of this story did you know? And were there things that surprised you about where connecting those dots to where we are now in this country?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember when it happened, but my exposure to it when it happened was very limited to whatever was on television. I think that's kind of the way they wanted it. I mean, in order to find out much about it, you really have to go looking for it. They don't want it to just be general knowledge, which is why, Gary Noesner writing his book, Stalling for Time, it was a real generous thing for him to do, to kind of illuminate things that we probably wouldn't know about otherwise or wouldn't consider otherwise. But yeah, I was coming at it originally from probably a very similar place to anyone else, in that I just remembered it was an upsetting thing that I had seen on television.
Yeah, you've played a lot of real people, not so many real people who are still around and are consultants on the
Yeah.
projects that you're working on. Gary Nestor is the guy who you're playing, and he also was a consultant on this show. I want to ask about what it was like working with him, particularly working with him again. What kind of a relationship do you have with someone knowing that you have been given the responsibility or the privilege of playing him?
Well, yeah, that could be very nerve-wracking. But Gary's such a lovely person. It's really easy to be around. And he seems, he's always saying that he calls me his doppelganger. I'm his doppelganger. And it's funny because we don't look alike necessarily, or even sound alike all that much, but I don't know. He seems to trust me, and he seems to enjoy watching the fruits of my labor, even if he doesn't always think it's exactly the way it happened. He's smart enough to know that there are going to be some differences between his life experience and what's on the show, and he doesn't mind that, as long as he feels like it's in general kind of telling a story that means something to him. And so far, I think it is. But um, yeah, I mean, I could pick him up. I could pick up the phone right now and start texting with him. He's always sending me pictures of his when he goes on vacation or whatever. He's just a real sweet guy.
Well,
Particularly considering what he's been through.
Right.
Would
I
you,
mean,
you
I
know?
know I've read his book. Waco was not his only rodeo. He went through really, really intense story. There were some really intense stories in his life. And as this series shows, what happened in Waco, Texas in 1993 was just part of his life story.
Yeah, and he's seen it in all different, magnitudes from, something as big as Waco to even just a domestic dispute, or and everything in between, but yeah, I don't know, he's gotten to a point, he's retired now, and he seems very much at peace. I don't know how he did it, but that's how he seems. Yeah.
Michael, I want to ask you, what did he teach you, or what did you learn from him about the art of negotiation? Because it's such a specific, subtle skill. And watching you in this show and watching the way that you talk, there's a scene where you're talking to a bank robber, particularly, and the ways in which you try to build rapport and commonality. What did he teach you about how you do that, how you establish that? And I wonder, do you use that now going forward in your acting?
Yeah, right. Um, well, it's really just about it's not to oversimplify it, but it's really about two fundamental things that are quite basic and anybody can do them. One is listening, which is also one of the primary building blocks of acting. So there's a good overlap there. And I think great listening is something that people take for granted, or they're not even really necessary. They're like, well, yeah, I hear things all the time, but to really listen to somebody and consider why they're saying what they're saying and why they're doing what they're doing, I don't know. I guess because it's not something that can really be taught so much. A lot of it's very instinctual. But the other is just having empathy for other people, having the capacity to imagine what it's like to be someone else and be in their position. Again, another also has in common with acting, one of the foundations of acting. So I guess acting and negotiating have a fair amount in common, oddly enough.
Yeah, I think so. You know,
Yeah.
you've played so many real life people before, from obviously, you know who you've played, Elvis, George Jones, to Richard Kuklinski. You've played such a variety of people. And when you said that that Gary thinks of you as his doppelganger, even though you don't necessarily look or talk like him, that's interesting to me because it makes me wonder, what is it when you're playing a real person that you're going for? Because it's not just about the way you look or dress. What is the side of that person that you're trying to get to or communicate as an actor?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, yeah, I'm not trying to do an impersonation. I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't consider it doesn't mean that I don't study the person abundantly. Like, anytime I'm playing someone where I have the materials that I can study them, I do. If it's a book I can read, if it's a video I can watch, if it's an interview I can listen to, anything I can get my hands on. But um I guess a good way to talk about it is when I did the Elvis movie, I was hanging out with Jerry Schilling, who was Elvis's friend, and I had a lot of trepidation going into that one. I was like, I don't know, Jerry, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, I don't really look like Elvis or sound like Elvis. And Jerry basically just said, look, I don't really care. Like, there's a lot of people in the world who have put a lot of effort into looking and sounding like my friend and being able to convince people that they, are a version of my friend. But very few people have actually thought about what it was like to be my friend, what it was like to be him, what it must have felt like. And that was a big that was a big turning point for me in that project, because I went from being scared to death of doing it to it being the only thing I wanted to do, because what he said made a lot of sense. So I kind of, that's kind of my base, my basic marching orders anytime I'm playing a real person. It's not so much like to try and fool you into thinking that I'm them, but it's trying to communicate what the experience of being them is like, you know? And because logic dictates, unless you're, I don't know, Lon Chaney Jr. or something, that you can only look like so many different people, you know? I mean, the fact that I played Elvis and George Jones is kind of ridiculous. You should either be able to play one or the other. But I guess I'm not trying to fool anybody into thinking that I'm anybody other than who I am, but I am trying to imagine what it felt like to be them.
Makes you a good FBI negotiator. Get
Yeah,
inside that empathy, right, Michael?
yeah,
Michael,
yeah,
when you talked about taking on that role and you said it scared you to death, you are a guy who has scared a lot of us to death. You have played some scare you to death, pee in your pants, scary guys in your
yeah.
career. You are drawn to often. I mean, you're in another movie now that is much more of a in the romantic or the comedic bent with A Little White Lie. You have certainly a range of roles, but you do play a lot of really, really scary guys. The guy who the audience is specifically not supposed to root for. And I want to know what it is about the antagonist that appeals to you.
I guess it sounds like a cop out, but I just never really, I never really think of it that way. I think the way I look at it is that every character is the protagonist of their own story. You know, what creates an antagonist isn't the character or the actor, it's the the filmmaker or the person that's making the story. They're the ones saying, this is the protagonist, this is the antagonist. But as an actor playing a part, I'm not thinking about that at all. I'm just thinking about, like, for example, when I played, one of the reasons I was interested in playing Zod is General Zod is because to me he wasn't an antagonist. He was in the the world in which he is from. He is the protagonist, and all he's trying to do is save his civilization, which is his job. And it just so happens that in the context of the story of Man of Steel, he winds up being the antagonist because we're here on Earth and we're like, oh no, don't hurt us, you know. But that's, I think that's important. That's an important delineation because it applies to how people behave on Earth and how people relate to one another on Earth. Is that they everybody's the center of their own universe. And
Even
so
Zod. And Zod is coming back.
Zod is coming back. He's going to be in the Flash. Yeah, they spilled the beans at the Super Bowl. I was surprised they did that. You'd think they'd want it to be some big surprise, but what are you going to do? Yes, he's coming back.
Okay, Zod is back. I want to ask you one more thing, because in addition to everything else you've got going on, you have directed your first feature
That's
yourself.
correct. I
Can you
did.
tell me a little bit about Eric LaRue?
Of course, I'd love to. Yeah, Eric LaRue is a teenage boy. I think he's what is he, 17, 18. And one day he goes to school and he shoots three of his classmates and he winds up going to prison. So he's in prison, and the movie is about his mom Janice, who is played by Judy Greer, and his dad Ron, who's played by Alexander Skarsgård, and it's about how their lives have changed because of what their son did and how they're trying to cope with it or figure out, well, what do we do now? And it has a lot, explores a lot of about religion and explores a lot of stuff. But yeah, that's the thumbnail version of it.
And it's your first time directing. Very
Yes.
exciting. Congratulations. And you have another movie coming out with Jeff Nichols soon called The Bike Riders. Congratulations on everything. But in the meantime, we can watch you in Waco, The Aftermath. Michael, thank you so, so much for talking to us, and congratulations on all of your exciting projects. It's an absolute privilege to talk to you today.
Oh, my pleasure, Mary Elizabeth. Nice to talk to you.